Have you ever wondered if God still sends miracles today? Not through lightning or grand voices from the sky, but through the silent faith of a dog who never gave up. When a small town ignored the signs, it was one golden retriever who stepped forward, risking everything to lead them back to the truth. This isn't just a rescue story, it's proof that when we listen with our hearts, God still speaks, even through pause. Dear friend, if you have watched this video up to here, please give me a small subscribe button, then help me share this story to more people if possible. Your support is my greatest motivation. Thank you very much. The early morning light filtered through the dense mist that hung low over Willow Creek, a quiet town tucked into the evergreen hills of southern Oregon. It was early spring, and the air carried the earthy scent of thawed soil and budding pine. The streets, still wet from last night's drizzle, gleamed under the hesitant sun. A hush still lingered in the town square. Shops remained closed, windows still covered in condensation, and the wind occasionally stirred forgotten leaves along the curb. Down Main Street, an old two-lane road lined with faded storefronts and maple trees just beginning to bud, the silence was broken by the sharp wail of an approaching ambulance. Its light sliced through the fog as it sped toward Willow Creek General Hospital, carrying a patient clinging to life. At the intersection by the old clock tower, now stuck forever at 642, a figure emerged from the mist. Golden, broad-shouldered, with a muscular build and proud posture, a dog stepped directly into the road. Murphy. He stood in the middle of the crosswalk, unmoving, as the ambulance approached. His coat was thick and dark gold, slightly dulled by dirt and recent rain, his frame sturdy and strong, around 6 years old. His ears perked forward, his deep amber eyes locked with the flashing red lights bearing down on him. There was no fear in his gaze, no sign of panic, only focus, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. The ambulance screeched to a stop mere feet from him, tires slipping slightly on the damp pavement. Inside the vehicle, Tom Haskins, a paramedic in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and a worn jawline, muttered in disbelief. "What the hell?" His partner, Lucas Bell, a younger man with freckles and anxious energy, slammed his hand against the dashboard. "It's just a dog, Tom," Lucas said. "We have to go. The guy's crashing." Their patient, an older man with deep burns across his chest and arms, lay unconscious on the stretcher between them. The heart monitor beeped erratically. Tom leaned on the horn. Murphy didn't flinch. Instead, he barked, once sharp and commanding. Then he sat. Within minutes, people began to gather. The noise had woken the town. Curtains were drawn back, front doors opened. A few townsfolk emerged in slippers and robes, forming a small circle at the intersection. Among them was Eleanor Briggs, owner of the local bakery, a stout woman with tired eyes and flour-dusted shoes, muttering, "Is that the same dog I've seen hanging around Miller's barn?" It was then that Emily Carter appeared, stepping quickly down the sidewalk with a coffee thermos in one hand and her brown leather satchel slung over her shoulder. She was 32, tall and slim, with a clean, professional elegance that stood out even in her casual wear, jeans, boots, and a plaid flannel shirt beneath a dark green vest. Her long chestnut hair was tied loosely behind her head, and she moved with the quiet decisiveness of someone used to emergencies. Emily had arrived in Willow Creek only a week earlier, having returned from Portland where she'd spent years running a successful but exhausting animal trauma clinic. After a burnout and the death of her mother, she moved back to the town she'd grown up in, craving stillness and something simpler, though she had no idea it would arrive in the form of a golden retriever halting traffic. She stepped past the murmuring crowd and approached the dog. "Easy boy," she said softly. Murphy turned to look at her. In his eyes she saw something strange, an urgency that wasn't fear or confusion. It was closer to intention, a message he couldn't voice. Emily crouched slowly, extending a hand. "You're not just scared, are you?" she murmured. Tom opened the ambulance door and stepped out. "Can you move him, Doc?" "I'll try," she replied, still watching the dog. "He's not aggressive." She brought her hand close. Murphy sniffed, then nudged it with his nose. Slowly, Emily reached for his collar. There was none. No tags either. The dog didn't resist as she gently guided him to the side of the street. He glanced back at the ambulance one last time before settling on the sidewalk. The moment the road cleared, the vehicle roared past, sirens flaring again. The gathered crowd began to disperse, murmuring in confusion and awe. Emily knelt beside the dog, stroking behind his ear. "That was no accident, was it?" she asked quietly. "You were stopping something. Or someone." Murphy didn't answer, of course, but he sat calmly beside her, tail sweeping the concrete in slow, deliberate strokes. "Looks like he trusts you," Eleanor called from the sidewalk, now holding a takeout cup of tea. Emily gave a small nod. "I don't think he's a stray. His body condition's good. He's been fed. Muscles are solid. Maybe lost or abandoned." "Maybe," Eleanor replied. "But I've seen him before. Near the old fire station. Always alone. Never barking." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. She glanced down at Murphy again. He stared back, and in that gaze she sensed something she hadn't expected to find in Willow Creek: mystery. Purpose. A weight too deep to be called coincidence. "I think I'll keep him with me for now," she said, standing. "At least until we figure out who he belongs to." Murphy stood up beside her. The sky began to brighten slightly as the fog lifted. Somewhere, church bells rang the quarter hour. Emily walked back down the sidewalk toward her home on Pine Street, Murphy padding beside her with measured steps, like he'd been waiting all along for someone to understand. Behind them, the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But at the old intersection beneath the frozen clock tower, tire marks and paw prints remained, silent traces of a signal sent in the only language the heart never misunderstands. The morning fog had mostly lifted by the time Emily and Murphy reached her modest two-bedroom cottage on Pine Street. The house, inherited from her late mother, was built in the 1940s with white-painted siding, deep green shutters, and a wraparound porch that creaked underfoot. Emily had only just begun unpacking the final moving boxes a few days ago, and now she found herself sharing the space with a 70-pound golden retriever who had stopped an ambulance like he had a purpose. Murphy trotted beside her like he belonged, his tail swaying slowly, his steps measured and sure. Inside, the scent of cedarwood and coffee lingered faintly in the kitchen. The floor creaked as Emily moved across it, setting her satchel on the table and filling a bowl with water. Murphy didn't hesitate. He drank, not ravenously, but steadily, pausing occasionally to glance at her like he was still assessing if he could trust her completely. His coat looked even darker in the soft interior light, rich amber with darker undertones, particularly around the ears. She noticed a faint scar on his front right leg, half hidden beneath the fur. It looked old, healed, but deliberate, as though from an accident or past injury. Emily crouched to get a closer look. "You've been through something, haven't you?" she whispered. Murphy sat beside her, lifting his paw slightly without her asking, as if to say he didn't mind her looking. The gesture caught Emily off guard. There was something uncanny about his quiet understanding. She didn't speak again, just nodded. For some reason, she felt he understood that too. A few hours later, word had already spread through the town. Willow Creek may have had a population of just under 4,000, but gossip moved faster than traffic. By lunchtime, 2 neighbors had come by under the pretense of returning borrowed pie tins just to ask about the ambulance dog. The first was Frankie Hill, a lanky teenage boy with 2 long sleeves and a skateboard tucked under one arm. He had a nervous stutter and eyes that rarely met yours, but he loved animals and often walked strays for the local shelter. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, pushing up his glasses, "is it true the dog stopped an actual ambulance?" Emily smiled gently. "It's true." "Cool," Frankie muttered, looking down. "He looks smart." "He is," she replied. "Maybe a little too smart." The second visitor came around mid-afternoon, Carla Jefferson, a retired librarian in her early 70s with sharp cheekbones, a cascade of silver hair in a loose bun, and a voice that could hush a room with one syllable. She wore a thick cable-knit sweater the color of blackberries, and walked with a cane carved with bird patterns. Carla was known for remembering every face, every date, and every story ever told in the town's tiny historical society. She had once cataloged the entire cemetery by hand. "I heard about the dog," Carla said as she stepped onto the porch without waiting for an invitation. "I also heard the name Murphy being tossed around. Is that what you're calling him?" Emily nodded. "It felt right. He reminds me of someone who once worked beside you, but never above you." Carla tilted her head. "That's an odd thing to say." "I know," Emily said, glancing through the screen door where Murphy lay quietly on the rug, watching birds through the front window. "But there's something about him. It's like he's got a mission." Carla leaned on her cane. "You might be right. There was a golden retriever like that here about 5 years ago. Belonged to a firefighter. I think his name was Jake Turner. Tragic thing, his house caught fire while he was out on a call. Lost the dog. At least, they said he did. Maybe it's not the same one. Dogs like that aren't too common, though." Emily's eyebrows rose. "Do you remember what that dog's name was?" "Something Irish, I think. Murphy, maybe. Or Marley. I'd have to look." Emily's breath caught for just a second. She didn't mention the scar or the way Murphy had blocked the ambulance like he knew who was inside. Not yet. It felt too soon to chase that thread, but she wrote it down in her mind with thick underlining. Later that evening, as the air turned crisp and dusk slid in through the trees, Emily decided to see how Murphy responded to a leash. She had found an old one in a box of her mother's things, still in good condition. When she held it out, Murphy stood and walked to her, sitting patiently as she clipped it to a makeshift collar. No pulling, no resistance. He walked beside her like he'd done it all his life. They strolled down Oak Ridge Lane, past a cluster of houses with manicured lawns and wind chimes singing quietly in the breeze. Murphy sniffed the air occasionally, but didn't pull toward anything in particular. Emily noticed something odd. He avoided the park. Not completely, but he skirted its edge, walking with his head down and his tail lowered just a notch. Curious, she led him closer, but he stopped, sitting down firmly in the middle of the sidewalk. She followed his gaze. Across the grassy field of the park, near the back fence, was a blackened patch of ground, a circle where a small fire had scorched the earth. It wasn't visible from the street, only from where they were now. No one had mentioned a fire in the park recently, and Emily would have remembered if it had been reported. Murphy didn't growl or whimper. He just stared. Emily placed her hand on his head. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go." They turned and headed back home, but something had shifted in her thoughts. The quiet dog she had taken in that morning might not be lost at all. Maybe, just maybe, he was looking for something. Or someone. And whatever had happened earlier that day at the intersection, it wasn't random. The sky over Willow Creek was a pale watercolor wash of gray and soft peach as the first light crept over the hills. A chill breeze swept through the tall firs lining the eastern ridge of town, rattling branches and carrying the scent of damp earth and early spring rain. Emily Carter stirred her coffee absently at the kitchen window, watching Murphy through the glass as he sat motionless on the porch, ears perked toward the street, posture alert yet patient. It was their third morning together, and already a rhythm had emerged, one that felt less like routine and more like ritual. Murphy would wait at the door after sunrise until she leashed him, and then he'd lead. Always forward, never hesitant. Emily zipped up her jacket, the thick olive green one her mother had insisted she bring back from Portland. She clipped the leash to Murphy's makeshift collar, and off they went, down Pine Street, past Mrs. O'Reilly's rose garden and the shuttered bait shop, then turning toward the old service road behind the high school. Murphy didn't walk randomly. He paused at street corners like he was checking coordinates. When they reached an alley between the back of the hardware store and a rusted chain-link fence, he stopped, sniffed the air, and moved on. It wasn't until they arrived at a gravel lot behind a boarded-up laundromat that he came to a full halt. The lot was empty save for a few beer cans and a rusted shopping cart turned on its side. Cracks in the concrete spidered outward like a broken windshield. Murphy sniffed the ground intensely, tail low but not tucked, and circled a single spot 3 times before sitting. Emily knelt beside him. There, in the dust, she saw the faint imprint of a scorch mark, nearly invisible, but unmistakable to someone who'd treated burn victims and smoke-inhaled pets for years. A small, perfect circle, about 2 feet across. The kind that came from accelerant fires. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, then opened the Notes app and started a log. Location: one old laundromat lot, possible burn residue, accelerant signature. Murphy sat voluntarily. They walked on. By the time they returned home nearly 2 hours later, Emily had logged 2 more stops. One was behind Danvers Fuel and Auto, a gas station owned by Charlie Danvers, a bald, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with oil-stained hands and a deep, rasping laugh. He'd been in town forever and seemed to know everyone's business without ever leaving his shop. The second stop was at the edge of a wooded trail leading toward the East Quarry, where Murphy sat again, just off the trailhead, sniffing a patch of blackened pine needles. Later that day, Emily visited the town library. The building was a red brick, single-story structure with ivy climbing the corners and a hand-painted sign that read, Willow Creek Public Library, founded 1911. Inside, the place smelled of old paper, floor wax, and stories long shelved. Behind the front desk sat Jenna Blythe, the town's archivist. She was in her late 30s, slightly hunched from years of leaning over records, with cropped auburn hair, reading glasses, and a soft-spoken voice that never rose above a whisper. Jenna had grown up in Willow Creek and had returned after her divorce to care for her ailing father. She was known for being fiercely private, but deeply meticulous when it came to documentation. "I need records," Emily said. "About fires. Small ones. From the last 6 months. Ones that weren't in the papers." Jenna looked up slowly. "That's oddly specific." "I have a theory," Emily replied, carefully choosing not to mention Murphy. "Maybe even a pattern." Jenna leaned back and tapped the desk with a pencil. "Arson? Not sure. But something's not right." After a moment's pause, Jenna stood and walked into the back archive room. She returned with a slim folder marked Code Reports, Miscellaneous Incidents. Inside were handwritten logs, notes from firefighters, local watch groups, and some insurance filings. Emily sat at a reading desk for over an hour, cross-referencing each report with the locations Murphy had led her to. There were no full investigations, but she noticed a trend: reports of small, localized burning or trash ignitions in the exact same spots Murphy had stopped. No official cause recorded. No suspects. Nothing stolen. Just flames. When she returned home, Murphy met her at the door as if he'd been waiting for her to confirm what he already knew. She sat on the porch with him as the sun dipped low. "You're not just walking old paths," she whispered. "You're showing me something." That night, while reviewing her notes, Emily took out a paper map of Willow Creek she had found in a forgotten drawer. She began marking each location Murphy had paused at. A pattern began to form, not a straight line, not quite a circle, but a spread of points around the town's industrial fringe. And right in the center of it all, the old firehouse. Abandoned for over a year now, ever since a new one was built near the hospital. The next morning, Murphy was waiting by the door again, leash coiled beside his paw like an offering. Emily stared at the growing collection of dots on her map, then at the dog, then back again. Something was burning beneath the surface of this town, slow and quiet, like embers under floorboards, and Murphy had been walking the perimeter. The morning sky loomed over Willow Creek in hues of cold slate blue, thick with the promise of rain. A wet wind rolled in from the east, tousling the tops of trees and rattling the shutters on Pine Street. Emily Carter zipped her coat up to her neck as she stepped out onto her porch, mug of coffee in one hand, and found Murphy already sitting beside the railing, eyes fixed on the road like a soldier awaiting orders. His golden coat shimmered with dew, and his expression bore that familiar quiet purpose, one Emily had come to recognize as the start of another lead. By now, she didn't hesitate. She tossed the leash around his neck without a word, and they set off toward the outskirts of town, past familiar intersections, through narrow lanes flanked by blackberry bushes and tall grass soaked from the night's mist. But this time, Murphy's steps were different, faster, more urgent. His tail was stiff, ears twitching at every distant creak or crow call. After 40 minutes, he veered off the path entirely, and pushed through a break in the underbrush near the eastern ridge. Emily followed, ducking under low branches as vines tugged at her sleeves. The ground here was uneven, littered with pine needles and broken roots. Eventually, they emerged in a clearing where the forest thinned into a slope of soft, damp soil. And there, without warning, Murphy began to dig. At first, Emily thought he was chasing a scent trail, maybe a small animal, but then she noticed how focused he was. His front paws moved with precision, not wild enthusiasm. His snout hovered low, guiding each stroke. Within minutes, he stopped and stepped back, tail low. Emily moved closer and saw what he'd unearthed. A fireman's cap. It was caked in dirt and leaves, the fabric weather-worn and stiff, but the black brim was unmistakable. She brushed it off gently, revealing the embroidered name along the inner band. Turner, J. Emily froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked down at Murphy, who now sat in complete stillness, eyes locked on the cap like he was waiting for her to understand. "Jake Turner," she whispered. Murphy lowered his head and nudged the cap gently with his nose. Later that day, Emily arrived at the Willow Creek Fire Station, the new one near the hospital, with the cap in her hands and Murphy walking beside her like a veteran returning to familiar ground. The station was a clean, steel-paneled structure with 4 bays, an office wing, and a flagpole out front that fluttered quietly in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and engine oil. Firemen moved with casual efficiency, checking gear, coiling hoses, reviewing reports. At the main desk stood Captain Roy Holbrook, a man in his mid-40s with a graying mustache, weathered hands, and the kind of posture only years of service could instill. He wore a navy shirt with gold insignia and greeted Emily with a nod. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Emily held up the cap. "Does this name mean anything to you?" Captain Holbrook's eyes narrowed. He took the cap from her gently, turning it over in his hands. "Jake Turner. Haven't heard that name in a while." "Who is he?" "Fireman. Good one. Young. Mid-30s, about 6'2". Broad build, dark blonde hair. Smart and careful. Had a working dog, golden retriever. Said the dog could sniff accelerants better than our equipment. Got both of them trained downstate, then brought him back here. He said it was his life's calling." Then, Holbrook exhaled, his eyes clouding. "He disappeared." Emily tilted her head. "What happened?" "Last year," he continued, "Jake started poking around fires no one else thought were suspicious. Said something didn't feel right. Minor blazes, garages, trash bins, equipment sheds. Small stuff, but consistent. Then one day, he didn't show up for his shift. His house was empty. Dog was gone. No sign of struggle. No suicide note. Just gone." Emily stepped aside, revealing Murphy, who had quietly followed her inside. Holbrook's brows lifted in recognition. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "Murphy?" Murphy responded to his name with a short, low woof. Then he walked over to Holbrook, tail low, eyes soft. Captain Holbrook dropped to one knee and scratched behind Murphy's ears. "You're supposed to be dead, old friend." Emily watched the moment unfold. "So it is him?" "Without a doubt," Holbrook nodded. "Jake had this trick. He'd raise his left hand and say, 'What's the verdict?' Murphy would always bark once if the area was clear. Twice if it wasn't. Holbrook raised his hand. 'What's the verdict?' Murphy barked. Twice. Holbrook stood slowly, face grim. "Something's not right. Jake might still be out there." Emily pulled out her map. "Murphy's been leading me to old fire sites. I've marked 5 so far. All of them had signs of accelerants. Minor burns, mostly overlooked. But they're forming a pattern." Holbrook looked at the map and nodded slowly. This was his theory too, that someone in town was testing fires, refining technique, staying under the radar. And he thought he was close. Emily hesitated, then added, "I think Murphy's still following his last trail." Before she left the station, Holbrook gave her a manila folder, Jake's final shift reports. "This is everything we found in his locker." He had notes. Maybe they'll help. Back at her cottage, as the rain finally began to fall in heavy sheets outside, Emily sat on the floor with Murphy and spread the papers across the rug. There were sketches, coded abbreviations, and fire dates. Her fingers moved across them slowly, and at the center of it all, underlined 3 times, were the words, "He doesn't make mistakes. But he doesn't leave witnesses either." Emily looked at Murphy, who stared at the door, alert and waiting, as if they were only just beginning. The rain had passed by morning, leaving behind a town that glistened in the pale gold of early light. Puddles shimmered on the roads of Willow Creek, mirroring treetops and sagging telephone wires. The air carried the scent of wet cedar and damp soil, sharpened by the faint bitterness of something else. Burnt plastic, maybe, or charred wood still clinging to the town's memory. Emily Carter stood over her kitchen table, papers scattered across it like puzzle pieces. Jake Turner's notes, the map she had started marking, and Murphy's route logs now shared a single surface, slowly forming a constellation of fire and silence. Each location, old laundromat lot, gas station fence line, forest trailhead, showed evidence of small fires, and each aligned with a section of town that Jake had logged in his final shift reports. Murphy sat by the door, alert, not impatient. His eyes held that same intense stillness, that unreadable but purposeful energy Emily had begun to recognize as readiness. She folded the map, tucked it into her coat pocket, and clipped the leash to his collar. They walked through the center of town and past the rusting water tower that bore the faded slogan, "Willow Creek, strong roots, bright future." Murphy led them past places they'd already visited, but this time he didn't stop. He seemed to be aiming farther out. Eventually, he paused at the edge of a gravel service road that ran behind the Willow Creek recycling depot. The depot was a dull brown building that had once been a train repair station, its exterior streaked with rust and paint peeling off in layers. A chain-link fence lined the lot, and inside sat stacks of metal drums and broken electronics. Murphy stopped at a spot just outside the fence and sniffed intently. Emily leaned down and pressed her palm against the ground. It felt slightly warmer than it should have. She pulled out a sample bag and scraped some ash into it, noting the oily residue clinging to the soil. Nearby, a single red plastic tag was half melted into the dirt. It read, "Combustible handle with care." Emily stood up, looking around, then noticed a figure moving behind the fence. A man emerged from behind a stack of scrap tires. He was heavy-set, mid-50s, with slick-back gray hair and grease-stained coveralls. His name tag read Jerry. He had a face like weathered leather and deep-set eyes that squinted suspiciously, as if the world had tried to cheat him too many times. "This is private property," he said gruffly, his voice hoarse from years of shouting over machinery. Emily raised her hands slightly. "I'm just walking my dog." He stopped here, and I thought, well, the ground's still warm. Jerry narrowed his eyes. "Probably some idiot lit a trash fire last night. Happens more than you think. Any cameras?" He scoffed. "What do I look like, the CIA?" Murphy barked once, then twice, backing up slightly. Emily nodded toward the lot. "You sure no one was here after dark?" "Lady, I lock that gate every night, and I'm the only one with a key." She thanked him and walked away, but her fingers were already scribbling in her notebook. Location 6 Recycling Depot rear lot, warm soil, ash with chemical residue. Resident claims no activity. Back at home, Emily pulled out her large paper map again and laid it across the floor. She began marking new points, including the recycling lot. As she circled them, she noticed something unnerving. Each of the sites Murphy had led her to were roughly equidistant from a central axis, the old firehouse. Every radius fell within 1 to 2 miles, never more. Jake Turner's final routes also mirrored this range. It was a pattern of confinement. Whoever had set these fires wasn't expanding, they were circling, testing, staying close. Murphy lay beside her, resting his head on his front paws, eyes still open. She reached down and stroked the patch of fur between his shoulders. It was slightly matted, still damp from the morning dew. As her hand moved, she felt a ridge under the fur, a second scar, this one newer, smaller. Clean. She frowned. Had he gotten hurt again? Before she could investigate further, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jenna Blythe, the town archivist. Short and cryptic, "Found something. Old permit. Meet me at the history room. Urgent. Emily grabbed her coat and map, calling for Murphy. At the Willow Creek Historical Room, located in a narrow wing of the library that smelled of old leather and varnished oak, Jenna sat with a stack of yellowed papers. Her usual reserved demeanor was cracked slightly, her lips tight and eyes brimming with a nervous energy. I went through some old municipal records, Jenna said. Found a permit application from last year. It was filed by someone under the name F. Harmon for construction near the old firehouse. The permit was for soil testing and utilities assessment. But here's the thing, there's no business attached. No follow-up activity. No address listed beyond vicinity of engine storage lot. Emily leaned in. So someone wanted to dig near the old firehouse but didn't want to be traced? Exactly. And guess who signed off on it? Don't tell me, Jenna nodded grimly. Councilman Ray Forsett. The one always pushing for the Urban Renewal Initiative. Emily's mind spun. Ray Forsett, late 50s, thick white hair, expensive boots, and a politician's practiced smile. He was Willow Creek's loudest advocate for revitalization. His plan involved tearing down historic sites, like the old firehouse, and rebuilding mixed-use developments. You think Jake found something out there? Emily asked. I think someone didn't want him to. Murphy stood suddenly, tail stiff, ears perked. A gust of wind rattled the window. Somewhere nearby, a car door slammed. Emily looked down at Murphy, who was staring at the door, unmoving. He was ready again. The sky over Willow Creek turned inky by early evening, clouds rolling in heavy and slow like beasts crouching above the rooftops. A hush fell over the town as winds slid through narrow alleys, nudging porch chimes into soft whispers. The old pine trees behind Emily's house creaked with the pressure of an incoming storm, and a damp chill hung in the air, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Inside her cottage, Emily Carter sat hunched over her kitchen table, pages of Jake Turner's old notes spread around a flickering desk lamp. Murphy lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching slightly with each shifting gust. The tension in the room was quiet but palpable. Emily's fingers traced a line on the map she had marked. 6 fire sites so far, all within a perfect radius. The epicenter, the old firehouse. And now a name, Councilman Ray Forsett. She was halfway through comparing the handwriting on the permit Jenna had given her to a note in Jake's file when Murphy's ears shot up. His whole body stiffened, tail straight, nose lifted to the air. Then he barked short, sharp twice and ran to the front door, growling low. Emily stood quickly. What is it? She asked, already reaching for her flashlight and coat. Murphy pawed at the door, let out a low whine, and looked back at her with wide, insistent eyes. Without hesitation, she leashed him, grabbed a small sampling kit she kept by the door, and stepped into the cold. Murphy led the way, pulling harder than he ever had before. They headed downtown, past dark storefronts and flickering lamplights, until they reached a narrow alley behind Dixon's Diner, a 1950s-style restaurant with neon signs and black and white checkered tiles that glowed eerily through the fog. Murphy stopped behind the dumpster, his body tensed, his nose close to the ground, tail rigid. He barked again, louder this time. Emily approached, flashlight sweeping the area. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just a pile of broken wooden crates and discarded takeout boxes. But then the beam caught something slick, a wet trail. She knelt, carefully brushing debris aside, revealing a thin stream of dark liquid trickling toward the back wall of the building. The odor was sharp and metallic, gasoline. Someone spilled fuel here, she whispered. Recently. She pulled on a pair of gloves and used a pipette to collect a small sample into a vial. Nearby, she found a discarded matchbook, soggy but unused, its logo reading the Ember Room, a bar on the other side of town. That too went into a bag. Just as she stood to leave, a voice called out from the shadows. You folks okay out here? Startled, Emily turned. A man stepped into view from the back door of the diner. He was tall and slender, maybe in his late 20s, with light brown skin, close-cropped black hair, and a soft, calm demeanor. His name tag read Leo, and he wore a white apron over a black shirt and jeans. I work the night prep, he said, stepping closer with cautious curiosity. Heard barking. Thought maybe someone was in trouble. Emily offered a small smile. We're fine. My dog just smelled something strange. Leo sniffed the air and grimaced. Gasoline? Yeah, that's not right. There's no reason for fuel to be back here. Just deliveries and garbage. Emily showed him the sample bag. Do you mind if I follow up with your manager tomorrow? Leo shrugged. As long as it doesn't get me blamed for anything. Name's Leo Carrington. I mostly chop onions and mind my business. His eyes flicked to Murphy, who now sat beside the puddle, tail twitching slightly. He's a beautiful dog, Leo added. Smart too. You can see it in his face. Emily nodded. He's something else. They walked back home in silence. Emily's thoughts raced. Someone had planned a fire tonight. If Murphy hadn't acted, Dixon's diner would have gone up in flames. Lives could have been lost. And that matchbook, it was a trail, intentional or careless. The next morning, Emily drove to a private lab in a neighboring town, using an old contact from her trauma response days. Kara Eastman, a forensic chemist in her early 40s, with a blunt bob of copper-red hair and permanently furrowed brows, greeted her at the door in a white coat stained with coffee and ink. Emily Carter, Kara said with a smirk. It's been years. Still chasing truth, Emily replied, handing her the sample. Kara took it with practiced hands. What am I looking for? Trace accelerants. Compare it to a profile I'll send later. Other samples from minor fires in Willow Creek. Kara lifted an eyebrow. Are you dealing with arson? Emily didn't answer directly. Not yet, but I think someone's testing fires, and someone else already paid the price for following the smoke. Later that evening, Kara called. Her voice was firm. Same compound in all the samples. It's a custom accelerant, not store-bought gas. Industrial blend. Someone's mixing it themselves. Emily's stomach sank. She looked at Murphy, who lay by the front door again, tail sweeping gently across the floor. You were right again, she whispered. The clouds hung low over Willow Creek that morning, thick with a dampness that softened every sound. Even the birds were quiet. Emily Carter stood by her kitchen counter, staring at the red mark she'd just drawn on the map. 6 confirmed sites, 1 near miss at Dixon's diner, and a growing feeling that time was running out. Murphy paced at the front door, his movements more restless than usual. His eyes met hers, sharp, intense, urging. She clipped the leash to his collar, pulled on her coat, and followed him out into the cold. This time, Murphy didn't take familiar paths. Instead, he led them down Elm Street, then through a thicket at the edge of town that few ventured into anymore. Once a lumber yard decades ago, the place was now a ruin of broken boards, rusted saws, and forgotten equipment blanketed in moss. Emily had only heard of it through old town records, Klein's Millworks, shuttered after an accident in the 90s. Rumors still clung to it like cobwebs. Murphy stopped before the collapsed remains of a storage shed. One wall had fallen completely, revealing a dark, yawning space beneath, an old basement door, partially hidden under weeds and warped planks. Emily hesitated. Murphy let out a low, persistent whine, then began pawing at the corner of the trapdoor. The latch groaned when she pulled it open. A wooden staircase descended into darkness, the air below thick and musty with mold and dust and something faintly metallic. Emily pulled out her flashlight. "Stay behind me," she whispered, though Murphy had no intention of obeying. The staircase creaked under her weight. Halfway down, the smell intensified, blood, rust, and something sterile like disinfectant poorly masking rot. They reached the bottom. It was a large, unfinished basement with exposed beams and a dirt floor. Shelves lined the far wall, filled with old paint cans, broken tools, and a rotting sleeping bag. But it was the far left corner where Murphy stopped, ears pinned back, tail lowered but determined. Emily raised her flashlight and saw him. Jake Turner. He was lying on his side, one arm twisted awkwardly behind his back, the other tied to a support beam. His shirt was torn, his face pale and bruised, with days-old stubble across his jaw. A bloody gash cut across his forehead, and his left ankle was swollen, wrapped in what looked like duct tape. Emily rushed forward, dropping to her knees. Jake! Jake, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, glassy but focused. When he spoke, his voice was dry and cracked. Murphy? The dog let out a soft whine and pushed his head against Jake's chest. Emily unwrapped the bindings. You're safe now. We're getting you out of here. No, Jake rasped. Not yet. You need to know. Emily paused. Know what? It's someone in town, he whispered. Someone people trust. As she cut the last of the tape from his wrist, Jake winced. I was following the fires, just like Murphy's been doing. I got close. Too close. One night, I caught someone dumping accelerant behind the elementary school. I confronted them. Thought I could scare them off. Instead, his voice broke and he looked away. Emily gripped his hand gently. They did this to you? Jake nodded. Said if I kept pushing, people would get hurt. Said no one would believe a fireman who lost his dog and lost his mind. So they made me disappear. Murphy licked Jake's hand, tail sweeping the ground slowly. Emily took a shaky breath. We're getting you out, she said. I need to call. Jake grabbed her wrist with what little strength he had left. No police yet. He's connected. I heard him on the phone. Councilman. Deals. Construction. He's planning something big, and it's tied to the firehouse. Emily's blood went cold. Rafer set. She helped Jake stand, slinging his arm over her shoulders. Then we'll move fast. Quietly. I know someone we can trust. With Murphy leading and Emily supporting Jake, they climbed back into the daylight. She loaded him into her Jeep, laid the seat flat, and covered him with a blanket. As she drove toward her cottage, Murphy sat in the back, eyes fixed on the road like a sentinel, ever watchful. Once home, Emily contacted Dr. Saul Bennett, a retired emergency medic in his 70s who still volunteered at the animal clinic on weekends. Saul was short and round, with a crooked nose, bushy white eyebrows, and a booming laugh that belied a steely resolve. He was known for treating people when hospitals wouldn't ask questions. He arrived in under 30 minutes, medical bag in hand, grumbling as he entered. What did you get yourself into now, Emily? Something real, she said, and possibly dangerous. When Saul saw Jake, his expression sobered. We'll keep him here for now. I'll patch him up. Emily helped Saul disinfect the wounds and wrap Jake's ankle. Jake drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring warnings. At one point, he whispered, he thinks Murphy's dead. Let's keep it that way. That night, Emily sat in the dark with Murphy curled at her feet and her map beside her. The fires weren't random. They were perimeter checks, testing reach, clearing space. And now, with the discovery of Jake, she had confirmation that someone had been silencing truth to protect whatever was coming next. Murphy lifted his head. The wind howled outside, and somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed, like thunder, or maybe something more deliberate. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. A gray sky blanketed Willow Creek as the wind carried the scent of burnt pine through the trees lining Pine Street. The town, still recovering from its string of mysterious fires, had no idea how close it had come to unraveling entirely. Inside her cottage, Emily Carter sat beside a small heater in her living room, reviewing Jake Turner's written statements while Murphy lay curled at her feet. Jake, still weak but recovering, rested in the guest room down the hall. His wounds were healing, though the trauma behind his quiet eyes remained fresh. Outside, it had begun to drizzle. The kind of rain that felt like whispered warnings on your skin. Murphy's ears twitched, but he didn't move. His gaze was fixed on Emily as she read over a page Jake had scrawled during one of his more lucid moments. 5 lines, all written in sharp, deliberate strokes. It wasn't the flames. It was the smell. Murphy barked. He knew. He always knew. Emily traced the sentence with her fingertip and sat back. Jake had told her that Murphy had reacted strongly to someone during the early part of his investigation. A man Jake hadn't fully identified, but described as having a clean uniform, a clean record, and very dirty hands. That's when it clicked. The ambulance incident. The very first day Murphy had appeared, he had blocked an emergency vehicle, barking and refusing to move. The paramedics had been carrying an unconscious man with visible burns. Everyone had assumed he was a victim. But what if he wasn't? Emily stood quickly, grabbing her notes. She found the report filed the day after the incident. She jotted the name down in passing, never thinking it mattered. Patient transported by Haskins and Bell. ID Mark Yates. Male, 61. Facial and hand burns. Recovered at Willow Creek General. Emily immediately called the hospital, requesting to speak with a nurse from the ER on duty that night. After 3 transfers, she reached Nurse Danielle Moyer, a practical woman in her mid-30s with a thick Southern accent and a dry sense of humor. Danielle had worked emergency care for over a decade and rarely forgot a face, especially one that smelled like smoke. "Yeah, I remember Mr. Yates," Danielle said. "Didn't say much when he came in, mostly unconscious, burns on his left side. Said it was a kitchen fire, but the burns didn't match. Looked more like chemical accelerant splash." Emily's voice sharpened. "Did you test the residue?" Standard tox screen came back clean, but no one ran a chemical sweep. "We were understaffed. He didn't want to press charges, and he checked himself out 2 days later." Emily hung up and turned to Murphy. "You knew from the start, didn't you?" She pulled out her phone and called Detective Lionel Graves, a man in his late 40s with a solid build, short salt and pepper hair, and a reputation for asking more questions than most in the Willow Creek PD were comfortable with. Lionel had moved to town from Chicago a few years back after burning out from a corruption scandal he refused to sweep under the rug. He'd been quiet since, but not blind. "Graves," he answered in his low, gravelly voice. "This is Emily Carter. I think I know who started the fires." There was silence, followed by a cautious, "I'm listening." She laid it out for him. The fires, Jake's disappearance, the link to Councilman Forsett, and most importantly, Mark Yates, the supposed victim. When she finished, there was another pause. "I remember that night," Graves said. "I was called in to review the scene. Something didn't sit right. No sign of an appliance shorting out. But nobody wanted to dig. Yates is well connected. Used to own half the buildings on East Main before he retired." "Connected how?" "Forsett's campaign donor. They go back 20 years. And he had a business license tied to a chemical supply company that shut down 2 years ago. Caught moving black market solvents. Charges dropped. No trial." Emily exhaled slowly. "Do you think he's behind this?" "I think we've got enough to start asking the right questions," Graves replied. "But you need to be careful. If this goes deep, people will push back. Jake nearly died because he asked." "I know. I'll start quiet. Pull hospital security footage. I'll find out who signed him out and where he went." That evening, Emily updated Jake. He sat up in bed, propped against pillows, his face still drawn but more focused than before. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his tea. "I knew Murphy reacted to something," he whispered. "The night Yates was admitted, Murphy wouldn't leave the hallway. He barked at the stretcher twice. I thought he was just stressed. I should have known." "You did," Emily said. "You just didn't have the whole picture." Jake managed a small smile. "But he did." In the days that followed, Graves confirmed their suspicions. Yates had used a fake address to check out of the hospital. Video footage showed him meeting with a man in a city council vehicle, license plate registered to Forsett's office assistant. And more damning still, a shipment receipt found in an unfiled warrant tied Yates to an order of specialized accelerants identical to those in Kara Eastman's lab report. Now they had proof. But Emily knew something else. They needed to act fast before the next fire, before someone else got hurt, or worse. The day broke with strange clarity. After weeks of mist, drizzle, and ash-scented wind, Willow Creek woke beneath a crystalline blue sky. The town felt hushed, but not from weather this time, from waiting. A reckoning had been set in motion, and like dry leaves around a match, everything felt ready to catch. Detective Lionel Graves stood outside Willow Creek General Hospital, squinting beneath the morning sun. He wore a gray wool coat over his usual plaid shirt and dark jeans, his posture firm as he adjusted the badge clipped to his belt. Beside him stood Officer Marla Diaz, a younger officer with sharp cheekbones, short dark curls, and a calm steadiness. She had grown up in Willow Creek and joined the force to protect what she loved, but this was her first arrest involving town politics. Inside the hospital, Mark Yates sat in a chair in the private outpatient lounge, a paper cup of coffee steaming beside him, fingers tapping anxiously against his thigh. His burns had healed into pale, puckered patches, but the quiet arrogance in his expression remained untouched. He looked up as Graves and Diaz entered. "Detective," Yates greeted, voice smooth but tight. "Something I can help you with?" Graves didn't answer. He produced the warrant and laid it flat on the table. "You're under arrest, Mr. Yates, on suspicion of arson, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud involving municipal funds and public endangerment." Yates's smile faltered. "You don't know what you're playing with." "We do now," Graves said flatly. "Get up." When the news hit town by midday, it spread like wildfire. At the cafe, Eleanor Briggs dropped her scone halfway to her plate. At the barbershop, old Mr. Watkins cursed under his breath and said, "Knew something was off with that one." And outside the elementary school, parents whispered as they watched their children run across the blacktop, suddenly realizing just how close danger had come to their doors. Emily heard about it while walking Murphy near the central square. Carla Jefferson, the retired librarian, flagged her down from the steps of City Hall. She wore her usual deep green cardigan and held a copy of the Willow Creek Times in her hand. The headline read, "Local businessman arrested in connection with suspicious fires." "You did it," Carla said. "Well, you and that dog." Emily smiled, but it was tired. "We had help." That evening, Emily organized a small gathering at the town's community center, a simple red brick building with faded banners from past harvest festivals still hanging in the windows. She had invited everyone, neighbors, shopkeepers, firefighters, even hospital staff, and the place filled quickly. In the center of the room, hung on wire grids and wooden easels, were blown-up photographs. Murphy standing in front of the firehouse, the blackened spot near Dixon's diner, the old firefighter's cap, dirt still clinging to the brim. Each photo was captioned with one sentence from Jake's recovered journal or Emily's case notes. Together, they formed a silent testimony, an exhibit titled, "Murphy, the Map That Walked." At the back of the room stood a tall donation jar marked, "Support your local heroes. Proceeds go to Willow Creek Fire and Animal Wellness Fund." Children placed pennies and quarters inside, and their parents added bills folded quietly, reverently. Jake Turner was there too, walking with a cane now. His face had gained color again, and while the scar across his temple hadn't faded, neither had the gratitude in his gaze. He leaned against the wall, watching as people passed by the photographs, most stopping at the one of Murphy barking before the ambulance. "He knew before any of us," Jake whispered. "That's what haunts me. We didn't listen." Emily stood beside him. "But we're listening now." On stage, Captain Roy Holbrook took the mic. The fire chief stood tall in his dress uniform, polished buttons catching the light. His voice, gravelly and low, carried with calm pride. "Sometimes," he said, "the most heroic things come from those who can't speak in our language, but never stop trying to tell the truth." He looked down at Murphy, sitting proudly in the front row, tail curled neatly around his paws. "I nominate Murphy for honorary member of the Willow Creek Fire Department," Holbrook continued. "With all rights and belly rubs duly granted." The room burst into applause. As the noise died down, a reporter from the local news channel approached Emily. She was in her 40s, with short blonde hair and a notepad worn soft at the corners. Her name was Nina Lambert, a veteran journalist who had covered fires, floods, and even a bear loose in the library parking lot the previous spring. "Dr. Carter," Nina said gently, "what made you trust Murphy in the first place?" Emily looked at the dog by her side. "He never asked for trust," she replied. "He just gave it, over and over, even when we didn't deserve it. And eventually, you'd be a fool not to follow." That night, under a clear sky pierced by starlight, Emily sat on her porch with Murphy beside her. The town was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "You did good, Murph," she said, scratching behind his ear. No more fires. No more shadows. Murphy didn't bark. He didn't wag. He simply leaned against her leg and stared at the stars, as if still watching, still guarding. Because even after the final flame is put out, someone always needs to hold the light. Spring had fully arrived in Willow Creek. The sun hung high over the town square, painting everything in a warm gold that softened the edges of buildings and faces alike. Fresh flowers bloomed in planters lining the sidewalks, and someone had tied red and white ribbons around the lampposts, fluttering gently in the breeze. It was a rare day, the kind people in small towns remembered years later with the phrase, "You had to be there." In the center of the square, a temporary wooden stage had been built, decorated with a backdrop of the American flag and the town seal, a pine tree framed by two crossed axes. A podium stood to the left, polished and waiting. Folding chairs filled the square, occupied by residents of all ages. Children perched on their parents' knees. Teenagers stood at the back scrolling half-attentively on their phones, and older residents leaned forward in walkers and wheelchairs, eyes glinting with quiet pride. On the front row, surrounded by a small velvet rope, sat Emily Carter, Jake Turner, and Murphy. Emily wore a navy blouse, her chestnut hair pulled into a loose bun that danced in the sunlight. Jake, walking better now with only a cane, had traded his bandages for a light gray suit. His movements were still cautious, but his smile had returned. And Murphy, well, Murphy was freshly bathed, his golden coat gleaming like wheat fields in July. Around his neck was a special red bandana stitched with the words service, loyalty, heart. Mayor Helen McBride, a petite woman in her 60s with close-cropped silver hair and a voice that could command silence without raising volume, stepped onto the stage. Her usual businesslike demeanor had softened for the occasion. Today she smiled. "Good afternoon, Willow Creek," she began. "We gathered today not because of loss or fear or even justice, but because of loyalty, because of bravery, because of one remarkable animal and the humans who listened to him." Applause followed, gentle at first, then swelling. "We all know now," Mayor McBride continued, "what Murphy did. How he warned us, led us, protected us. But more than that, he reminded us of something we forget too easily, that heroism isn't always loud, and courage doesn't always walk on two legs." She reached for a small case handed to her by a uniformed fireman. Captain Roy Halbrook stood beside her, still wearing his dress blues, his broad frame still and respectful. For his actions in protecting the people of this town, for his role in uncovering the truth, and for the love he showed even when abandoned and nearly forgotten, it is my honor to present Murphy with the Civic Medal of Bravery and declare him an honorary citizen of Willow Creek. Murphy stood, without command, without cue, and walked to the stage. He paused at the steps. The crowd went silent. Then Jake whistled softly, a sound only the two of them ever truly understood. Murphy moved again, calm and proud, stepping up onto the platform beside the mayor. She bent gently, placed the medal around his neck, and kissed his head. The applause this time was thunderous. Emily wiped a tear before it could fall. Jake simply nodded, his hands gripping the cane tightly, the pain in his ankle forgotten. After the ceremony, townspeople lined up for photos, some kneeling beside Murphy, others just patting his head in quiet thanks. Children asked if he was magic, and elderly neighbors whispered that maybe, just maybe, angels didn't always wear wings. At sunset, Emily and Jake walked back to her house together, Murphy padding along beside them, his medal clinking softly with each step. "I'm not going back to Portland," Emily said as they turned onto Pine Street. "I was going to at first. I thought I needed quiet. But this matters." Jake looked at her, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "You're staying?" "I'm doing more than staying." She smiled. "I'm opening a canine rescue and training center. Here. For search dogs, retired service animals, even therapy dogs. And Murphy's going to be the head trainer." Jake chuckled. "Does he know that?" Murphy stopped, turned to look at both of them, then trotted ahead toward the gate like he already had a list of students to enroll. In the following weeks, the new Willow Creek K-9 Rescue and Training Center took shape on the property behind Emily's cottage. Volunteers helped build the first training yard, fenced, soft turf, with tunnels, ramps, and scent marking stations. Local businesses donated supplies, and even Councilwoman Tara Collins, long skeptical of public funding for animals, agreed to sponsor community classes. The first session welcomed 10 dogs, mutts, retrievers, a shepherd, even a nervous beagle named Daisy. And at the center of it all was Murphy, demonstrating, guiding, correcting with gentle nudges or firm eye contact. The dogs responded not because he barked orders, but because he led them with quiet certainty. One afternoon, a young boy named Miles Avery, no older than 9, arrived with his single mother. Miles had selective mutism, hadn't spoken aloud since his father's passing 2 years before. His mother, Renee, tall and freckled with tired eyes, had hoped interaction with animals might coax him out. She stood by nervously as Murphy walked toward her son. Miles didn't flinch. He reached out. Murphy nuzzled his hand. Then soft, hesitant, a whisper. "Hi, Murphy." Renee burst into tears. Emily, watching from the fence, turned away to wipe her eyes. Some rescues happen in fire, others in silence, and Murphy knew how to meet both. Not all miracles arrive with thunder or angelic light. Sometimes they come in the form of a bark in the night, a loyal gaze, or 4 quiet paws that know exactly where to lead. Murphy couldn't speak, couldn't write, couldn't explain right from wrong. But he knew danger. He knew truth. And most importantly, he believed that, no matter how lost we seem, humans can still learn to listen. God doesn't always show himself the way we expect. Sometimes he sends a silent friend like Murphy, one who guards us from the fire, one who reminds us that justice takes patience and forgiveness takes courage. This story isn't just about a dog who saved a town. It's about faith. It's about love in action. It's proof that even the smallest steps taken in trust can become miracles. And that when we walk with love and loyalty, quietly, humbly, God walks with us. In everyday life, you may find yourself walking through shadows, through moments of uncertainty or fear. Remember, what you do today, even the smallest act of love, could be the very miracle someone else has been praying for. Don't ignore the quiet signs, the warnings, the love, the guidance, even if they come from an unlikely friend. If you believe God sends miracles at the right moment, comment Amen below as a prayer for those still waiting in the dark. Don't forget to share this story with someone who may need to hear it, because their miracle might begin with your message. Click subscribe to follow more stories of hope, faith, and the kind of love that changes everything. May God bless you and your family. And if you've been searching for a sign, reading this right now might just be the one. Comment Amen if you believe that loyalty and love are some of God's greatest gifts, sent through both people and animals.